Good morning. Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming, and thank you, Aya, for organizing this event and for basically giving us the chance to come together in these difficult times. It's a very rare opportunity for me to be among people who I know have a direction of free, true scholarship. And as Aya once described it when I was speaking to her last week, of looking at scholarship as an act of service to ourselves before our own communities. So, yeah, having said that, the talk I'm going to speak about today is basically, I'm revisiting research that was triggered in 2014, that's 12 years ago. It was triggered by two main events. One was the fact that whenever you would mention Palestinian spatiality, the name of Israeli scholars would come up, and sometimes Zionist Israelis. And then another frustrating moment where we were discussing basically modernity and architecture, and Palestinians, indigenous Palestinians, as problematic as the term is, living in their own village of Majd Krum, which is in Upper Galilee, were discussed in a paper as a problem of modernism. So basically, the whole colonial apparatus, the whole structure and infrastructure of colonial violence has been set aside, and Palestinians living in their own, going about their everyday in what is now termed as Israel, were discussed as an Arab minority and as a governance issue. Like their problems, it was a governance issue. These two moments raised a lot of frustrations for me personally, but also raised a lot of curiosity on what do Palestinians do. Eventually, and that was also in 2014. I can imagine the whole thing was concluded in another moment of catastrophe to reflect on today's theme. It was the 2014 war on Gaza, and it's like a peak in this ongoing perpetual catastrophe that we live by. So now, as been delving deeper into this catastrophic state, if I may say, I would really want to revisit this research and maybe open it up for further elaboration, and I'll get to speaking about it now. So this trigger started by, as I said, asking questions on Palestinian spatiality. What do we do? You know, what do we do as agents in our own space and land? It started as an attempt to move away from the complete dehumanization and objectification of Palestinians as space and Palestinians are discussed. And through that, I think when you attempt at such a venture, and as difficult as it is to engage with grand narratives back then, as they are even more difficult now to engage with any grand narrative, I turned into the everyday. What do we do on an everyday basis? How does Palestinian spatiality look like? And it was a very open inquiry. Many of them called it a PhD topic. I'm still running away from that. I did not. So I turned into everyday spatial resistance, what I term as popular resistance, and I wanted to look at the spatial component in that. One major point that I had, speaking of the initial triggers that what basically initiated this curiosity, is flipping the gaze. Lots of research, as I explained, that is done on Palestine, on the spaces, and especially within urbanism on Palestine, is discussed as through the immense power that is the Palestinians are subjugated to. They're discussed as objects. They're discussed in views that I don't personally identify with, although me, myself, a Palestinian living in Amman. So I wanted to flip the gaze. And by flipping the gaze, I was also trying to introduce sort of a complete change in worldview. I was intentionally looking at settler colonialism, the settler colonial condition in Palestine, as a condition, and as Palestinians, an agent, as continuous agents working through our spaces and lands, wherever we are. And in that, of course, comes many questions, which I think are key to the theme of this session, which is inhabiting catastrophe. Because the session itself asks the question of how. And when we speak of the how, I see two major points related to my own practice and the theme, which is positionality and method. And in interrogating those two terms and concepts, not just terms, I started the research hinging on what I call anchors. I did not want to go into a linear path, so the whole research was organized through anchors. I'll speak about a bit about these anchors now, and I'll speak about the research itself, and hopefully end with a moment where I see the convergence between the current moment that we're going through, that research, and how it could eventually go. So I started with what I call anchors, also because I wanted to interrogate methodology. I did not want to go linearly, and it was inevitable, as we all know, in today's academic atmosphere, to define what is Palestine to me, what is Zionism, and to somewhat justify these terms and kind of lay them out, which I refused to do. I just put some anchors. And through explaining the historical threads of situating the research, I decided to invite the readers. I decided to give references and invite the readers to labor and basically read and maybe contribute through their own understanding of what they see around this case and this cause. So Palestine, settler colonialism, we set the stage with that, and then I go into historical threads, as I said, with references. And then I had to basically confront an issue that I think we all confront as we work within these the specters of the undercommon, which is positionality and where I dwell. I wanted to do this research within Palestine. I've lived in Amman most of my life. I have a very particular positionality within the wider social group. So I had to confront that, which I think is something that we constantly have to do, as Palestinians in the diaspora. That's why sometimes maybe revisiting this now could turn into new results or more elaborate results. And in where I dwell, I had to basically explain, kind of position myself from whatever I wanted, the fieldwork I wanted to do, who I'm presenting this to. There was a lot of discussion on positionality there, but I was also insisting on treating myself as a subject. I was insisting also, so the research had a personal and a collective take on it. Whatever methodological frameworks I was adopting, I was applying to myself as a person, but also as, hopefully, the wider Palestinian group. These are few anchors, and then I go into more anchors, speaking about, I think many of us will mention this, the homeland, the concept of homeland in Palestinian imaginary, which I found very much connected to the landscape itself, to the ecology of the land. And I was trying to illustrate that through poetry. I was trying to borrow from the arts, because it doesn't have to be academic also. There's a lot of legacy from poetry, music, community solidarity groups that basically equate the concept of homeland with the landscape. Of course, this raises a lot of questions on urbanity and Palestinian urbanity, but that's a topic for another research probably. And I went to the theoretical anchors where this research would hinge on. I was intentionally moving away from, or trying to abolish, the Eurocentric binary logic present in post-colonial theory, in all of these, because the moment you mention any insurgent or revolutionary movements in spatial theory, you turn into Foucault and Lefebvre, and to me, to be honest, they didn't really ring a bell. They didn't really resonate in any sort. So I moved away from that, and I was able to find the, basically, justification at least. I was trying to go more into the tools, what other tools and other theory I can really grab myself into. I looked at the concepts of basically the production of space versus construction of space. And in that found a very interesting opportunity to have Palestinians basically construct spaces socially through the social group. I also looked into the tools, as in the apparatus for this research, and went into this critique of mapping and cartography and the whole, basically, colonial roots to the practice, and what I call also, what I would like to term as a function of difference, so as trying to formulate the research away from borders and territorial, basically, constructions of space. And in that, when I was looking at older texts on mapping and basically map making, I ran into Idrisi, one of the earliest first world maps of the world. And interestingly enough, the maps of Idrisi were very much, I mean, there are little visuals to them, but they were very much narrative. And I decided to take that route of narrative research or narrative map making. And eventually, as I was also confronting the basically post-colonial theory and the spatial theories, running into Spivak's title, Can the Subaltern Speak? I find myself infuriated by this question itself, because from what I've seen, and we all come from backgrounds of working with refugee camps, from what I've seen, the subaltern acts. It doesn't wait to speak, it doesn't care to speak sometimes, it just acts, it just moves. And there was some sort of resonance with the maps of Idrisi and the whole legacy of geographers and travel, and knowing the land through narrative, travel, movement, and geography. And these were mostly the anchors that the research took off from. Now, in order to answer some questions on Palestinian spatiality, I also had to look at what was termed back then as spatial resistance. There was a surge of movements in 2012-13 where people were actually using space and land in their popular resistance movements. There were so many examples, from Bab al-Shams to Ain Hijle to Al-Araqib to, I mean, in different geography, across the geography of Palestine. And it was basically important to me to look at them all, at least, and have that start. So I looked at that, and I'm just passing through the research quickly because I'm gonna get to the conclusion and hopefully open up a question for the conference and the basically titles around it, because this research is being updated as we speak. So in looking at spatial resistance in Palestine, what I saw is that there was a huge variety in how people use space to resist the settler colonial condition. It really basically stretches from adaptation to accommodating the structure to resisting it. Sometimes space is used as a tool, sometimes a medium, sometimes even only a trigger, and sometimes, more often than not, actually always the aim. So the aim is also always return and basically getting access to land that you're not allowed to access. I then move into basically like a diary entry of my own journey to Palestine. That was my second time only into Palestine. I've lived in Amman, as I said, all my life. And ironically enough, I go there as a Canadian. I cannot enter as a Palestinian. So that privilege allowed me to do that journey, but it was still a very intense journey from when I'm traveling and I'm speaking to people, because one of the anchors were my own social group. I'm still sure that if I'm not part of that social group from a horizontal and vertical level, it would be not possible to be doing this research. Because through this journey that I made from Amman, I mean, as you can see the map, Amman to Ariha to Ramallah, Al-Azariya, Al-Quds, Beit Lahem, and I went all the way up north to Haifa, Kafr, Bir'im, and Iqrith. Not one map was used, basically. I was moving into entirely new territory, entirely new systems, sometimes in a language I don't speak, and not one map was used. I was literally moving in what I call navigating space through people, through the social group around me. So I did this intentional experiment, as I mentioned, trying to focus as much as I can on agency and situated procedural knowledge by my own self, but also the groups around me, and anchoring myself through the human anchors around me, whether be it friends, relatives, or acquaintances. I gave keywords, and I tried as much as I can to give space for people to shape the research. I did not really have a very clear end to how this is going to go, or what I want to, or even the format I want the research to end with. I still don't. I mean, I'm still researching it until this moment. And the exploration took the shape of mostly image. I was documenting my journey through images and conversation narratives, as I mentioned before. The whole research basically culminated in a lot of descriptions, I would say, back then, and eventually what I would call a momentary convergence moment that highlights navigation, and I'll come to that. But in terms of the descriptions, I was looking at a very transitory social view of space and land within Palestine, within the Palestinian imaginary in general, that basically has a dialectic relationship between place and people that cannot be separated and can always be rearranged and constantly rearranged at any space and time. It was not a very fixed structure. Now, the work itself elaborates this a bit more, but I'm just going through it quickly. So this convergence on navigation, basically, and especially within the subjective take, I'm trying to place onto this research, within this research, basically, it looks at navigation as a way of charting and negotiating distance from catastrophe. Because be it when I was born or when I was basically realizing how things operate around me, or when I had the curiosity to do the research, or through my work also with refugee camps in Amma in Jordan, there's always this certain distance from a space and catastrophe, basically catastrophe having that wide definition in various intensities. And through that definition, I think I want to revisit this type of research and look at navigation in these varying distances, because we're living now in a highly intensified moment through catastrophe. In the region, I would say, in different states, and I was discussing that with Aya, because we come here as people from different localities, different spaces, and I still think that the distance we have from catastrophe and how we navigate it has so much importance in basically how we negotiate it and how we formulate it. So I would love to revisit this research now, which can basically, when it was done in 2013, tried to enact the archive. I was looking at the case of Kafr Bir'im. I am just realizing I did not mention Kafr Bir'im yet. I'll get to that, which is the main case study I hinged on. And I would love to revisit it, enacting the archive in a simultaneous temporality, so past, present, and future. Kafr Bir'im basically was the village I decided to have as a case study back then. I'm not sure if it's going to be the same. I spoke to one of the people, basically the community members of Kafr Bir'im a few days ago. He's in Finland. Another one is in Berlin, as you can imagine. But the movement continues in what they call as presence. Kafr Bir'im basically is a village in 48 Palestine. It only has a remaining church, while the whole village was bombarded in 1948. And people were standing at across the hill and watching their village being bombarded. It's 4 kilometers down the Lebanese border. The interesting thing about the case was that in 2013, people were having so many ceremonial and basically summer camps and a lot of things going back to their village. There was a school and a church only left. But at one point, they decided to just go back. They announced their return, and they started camping in the site of their village. So that was a very interesting case to me in how they maintained presence. And then, by extension, the research went from this presence that they maintain and the whole details of this presence into navigation and movement around the space, because they currently live in a nearby village. So, as I mentioned before, the convergence here is around the notion of navigation, I think, which I'm still grappling with through my practice in the past 10 years. I'm looking at navigation and cartography and maps, and how can we basically document spatial knowledge and communicate it within this entirely socially coded systems that we go by in a way that actually works in resisting settler colonialism and drives us more towards return and liberation. That's my question for now. I'll stop here, and thank you all for listening.
Thank you very much.